A very good afternoon, and thank you very much for making time to talk to us here. Let me start with you, Emmanuel. And I'm going to ask all of you to give your opening statements to this simple question about what you think the solution is to the country's power crisis right now. What do you believe is the solution to the energy crisis facing the country?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity just to discuss what you call a very easy question, which but I think is a very difficult question, almost an impossible question for one person to answer. And that's why I think, more discussions like this panel should take place, in order for us to come up with the right solutions. It's my view that at the moment that the private sector and the government need to come together in finding these solutions for the energy crisis. We're finding ourselves in a position where, the energy sector is monopolized, and monopolies don't breed for efficiencies, don't allow for, certain things to happen as quickly as it would in the private sector. So I believe it's a taking of hands of, private sector and government. It's a taking of hands of renewable energy and, fossil fuel energy. Fossil fuel energy has become cleaner, and there are technologies that are allowing for cleaner fossil fuel energy. So we believe that it's a combination of a coming together of different spheres, different organizations, different governments, and, coming with a plan that we can all action and, be proud of.
All right. Liz McDaid, talk to us. What do you think are the solutions?
Good afternoon. I think we need to focus on affordable, diversity, good governance, and making sure that we don't store up environmental problems for the future in any short-term solutions we put forward. So I'm very sure that cleaning up the mess includes making sure that those people responsible are accountable. I think it's also about relieving Eskom. At the moment, it's flailing around. So the president's announcement was really welcome, but it's probably only the first step. I think we need to focus on energy efficiency. Calculations show we could save about 25% of our energy. Shifting the load means that we don't have these high peaks. We can flatten the peak. So everybody working together, I think there's many solutions which can be put on the table short term to alleviate the crisis, and then over the next couple of years, as all these small projects come on, that's going to help us going forward.
All right. Chanda Nxumalo, what's your take?
Thanks. I think I'd reiterate what the previous two speakers have said, really. We've welcomed the announcement by the presidency. There's been a lot of discussion in industry to get to this point and lobbying with government. But I think now that we have the announcement and the policy, we need to get the regulations bedded down so that projects can be built and implemented. And I think that's where sometimes there's a bit of a gap in timing. We're in a situation where, as you said at the beginning, load shedding is causing issues for not just households but businesses. And in order to relieve that situation, we really need to build projects to connect them either to the grid or to allow households to be able to be in control of their own electricity. And again, to reiterate what Liz has said, it's not just about producing more power so that we consume more power. We also need to understand that we need to be more efficient with the use of what we have.
Very interesting take indeed. Let me close with you, Dr. Kelvin Kemm. Talk to us about what you think the proposed solutions are here.
Well, I think there's not one solution. Electricity is the lifeblood of the nation. Electricity throbs through the country and means the entire industrial infrastructure of the country operates. Every hour that there's not electricity flowing in the country, not only is Eskom losing income, but there are industries all over the country losing income. It's hugely economically damaging to the nation. We've got to understand the entire country needs this. Then we have to look and say to ourselves, we have to divide this into the 6-month problem and the 6-year problem. At the moment, everybody's focused on the 6-month problem, saying, oh dear, I don't want load shedding tomorrow because I'm having a dinner party or something like that. What's important is the people that are going to build extensions to motor car plants. people who are planning to build new factories to provide work opportunities for the future. They are looking half a dozen years into the future. No big car company is going to come here and build a huge extension to their manufacturing plant on the off chance that there might not be electricity to power it in half a dozen years' time. So we've got to look at this thing as a solution to working towards the economy flowing daily in the interests of everybody, so that the costs of not only electricity are at their lowest, but bread and butter and machinery and cars and everything we buy. So it is something that really needs serious attention, and it's complex.
All right, Dr. Kemm, thank you for those opening statements. Well, you have heard the panelists. When we return, we're going to drill deeper. Just how big is the electricity problem in the country, and how long will it take to actually fix it? Very good afternoon to you, and you are watching the Uncensored Debate, and with my panelists we are discussing the issue of the electricity shortage in the country. Let me come to you, Emmanuel Ngulube. You are the CEO at ENT Minerals, and just out of interest, you are trying to win over the Optimum coal mine. You are bidding for that particular mine, but not that it's of much relevance to the topic at hand. Just how big is the problem of electricity when it comes to the mining space, and how badly do you think that sector is affected?
Oh, it's almost grievous at the moment. I mean, you look at the Optimum has been in business rescue close to 4 years, and it used to supply about 6% of Eskom's electricity, which is pretty much about 2,000 megawatts, which hasn't been supplied over the last 4 years due to the current rescue process. It is also we found that the inefficiencies of Eskom's purchase contracts, the corruption that is taking place within the organizations themselves, it hemorrhages not just Eskom and the power generation, but it also hemorrhages, the everyday person, with the load shedding that we're experiencing at the moment, with just supplying food for your kids at home. There's workers that have not had jobs for the longest time, and all these things, have a downward trickle-down sort of impact. It even goes down to your child studying for the exams. All these things and all these inefficiencies have such a massive impact on the rest of the country, right down to the grassroots level. And from the economy side, I mean, as you know, as I've said as well, Optimum was also another 6% provider into all global exports, which also, again, it's left a massive gap.
All right. Liz McDaid, you are with Outa, and you were partly responsible for fighting off the R1 trillion nuclear deal that was touted in the year 2017, if I remember correctly. You won that part. You are now involved in yet another battle. This one is around the car power ship, and it's got to do with the environmental impact that you are arguing for. So, my question to you is, what should we as South Africans do? Because we want the emergency power, and that is what this car power ship deal is meant to try and plug in, this gap of emergency power that we so desperately need, so that we don't go on with this load shedding problem.
Yeah. So firstly, I think we need to acknowledge that this so-called emergency risk mitigation bid has been dogged with controversy. Lots of irregular issues coming up. And so, yes, we need more power urgently. But the way this has been set up is we have ended up with very expensive possibilities coming in. And the car power ships, which have taken the lion's share of it, certainly seem to be very problematic. And one of their problematic things, which is what we have to look at when we're looking at solutions, is that you can't bring in an energy solution that then destroys something else. And so here you're looking at an energy solution that would destroy a whole lot of livelihoods and potentially permanently, because you're looking at 20 years. So there are a few other projects that made the grade, and we are hoping that government starts looking at a slightly different way of meeting that gap. And I'm sure that other panelists can speak to that, but from my perspective, we have already a whole lot of renewable energy plants around, and apparently some of them have got excess. So let's buy that excess. Then whatever's in the pipeline ready to roll, let's make the red tape go away. Let's make it a very smooth bureaucratic process, which is still good governance, still transparent, but then becomes an efficient use of time and energy, that we have the regulator that just smooths through this process. So that we can get things on the grid and working. And that's what we need. And I think the critical thing is often these short gap measures suddenly seem to attract all the sharks, and we end up with the brown paper bag scenario, if I want to say. So short term, who created the crisis? Who's going to benefit from solving it? These are the kind of questions we have to be asking. We have to be awake as South Africans. The 1 trillion deal was a good lesson. Let's not get into that kind of thing again. And let's look at what we've got. Homegrown. Why do we need a Turkish ship? Homegrown, power plants, things that can provide work to South Africans, build a manufacturing industry, and push us towards the future, not lock us into a fossil of a past.
Okay, all right. Chanda, I suspect that the words from Liz, that renewable energy should come in to also try and plug this gap. That's music to your ears as people in the photovoltaic industry. Explain to us very briefly first what your industry specifically deals with, and linked to that question, how soon can power be generated from renewable sources?
Okay, so the SAPVIA, or the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, is an association of members that is focused on supporting our members to build the solar industry in South Africa. And that ranges from small-scale installers putting panels on rooftops in homes, right up to utility-scale projects, so the 75-megawatt projects that you will have seen that government has procured in previous rounds, and everyone in between, companies that are providing engineering services, construction, operations and maintenance, cleaning of panels. So we represent the whole range of the industry players. And then your second question was, how soon can projects come online? So I think maybe we'll take a step back and to respond to what Liz said. The emergency procurement round, the lion's share went to the car power ships, but several projects were awarded that were solar PV combined with battery storage. And why that's important and exciting is that renewables are performing as dispatchable generation, which means Eskom can call on them when they need them and plug them into the grid, which is very exciting and really cutting edge globally in terms of the projects that South Africa is delivering. Then what also government brought online is what we call Round 5 in the industry, which is the Renewable Energy Procurement Program. So there have been 4 previous rounds. Round 5 is currently ongoing, and the bidding is due on 16th of August. And that is for 2,600 megawatts of power, both PV and wind, that needs to be online by the end of July 2022. So quite short time periods to build it. Plus, if you look at what we have been discussing in this context, which is this raising of the cap to 100 megawatts, there's also a whole lot of projects that are sitting, waiting in the wings that can be built quickly in the next kind of 6 to 9 months, depending on the size of the projects, that are able to supply then private companies, private households, in order to generate their own power. As I think the previous 2 speakers have also said, what is needed is ensuring that that process runs more smoothly so that we can get the power onto the grid as quickly as possible. So in order to build it, industry is ready and waiting to participate, but we need the regulation to allow smooth and efficient implementation.
Yeah. Dr. Kemm, let's bring you into the conversation. You are an advocate of nuclear energy. The decision dating back to 2017 that was fought off by Liz and her activists, were you in support of that?
Well, may I start off, please, by making a very important distinction between the measurement megawatts and the measurement megawatt hours.
Okay.
Megawatt hours is how much electricity you use in total. At the end of the month, a householder gets an invoice from the municipality. In the case of their house, it's kilowatts, and you pay for kilowatt hours. But if it's the megawatts or the kilowatts, that's how much available power you have now when you turn the lights on. And that is what industry wants. Industry wants power that's available now, all the time, dispatchable power. Dispatchable means you know it's there. When you pay for electricity, you don't just want to pay for the amount you used, you also want to pay for the reliability factor that is always there. Now, in the case of nuclear power, for example, right now, the nuclear power from Koeberg Nuclear Power Station outside Cape Town is the cheapest power in South Africa by far, by far. And there's another 20 years plus to go where Koeberg will continue to produce South Africa's cheapest electricity. We've got to look at keeping the machinery of the nation running. It's all well and good to worry about having your house lights on in the evening, but it's the mines that have to be kept going. It's the production factories. It's the big machinery. That's where people's income comes from. That's where salaries come from. That's where the railways are run and all that type of thing, from the reliable big power that you know is available all of the time. And this is why earlier I referred to the 6-week problem, the 6-month problem, the 6-year problem. There's a difference. We now need to look at the 6-year problem and say, what are we going to do? If you look back to 2008, when we were going to start building a large nuclear power station then, 50% bigger than what Koeberg is now, we should have done that. It was a mistake to stop. Had we done that, we would now have 3,500 megawatts of power running reliably 24 hours a day, no problem. It would be there. In fact, we could have built 2 by now. The plan was to build 3 power stations sequentially. Now, I must point out here, you earlier mentioned a figure of R1 trillion. There was never R1 trillion involved. That was invented by antagonists in the press. The professionals in the business worked it out at the time, and it came out at 650 billion rand to build 3 power stations sequentially. It was never 1 trillion rand once in 1 year. It was projected into the newspapers. It was 650 billion over a period of 10 to 15 years. We've already spent about 250 billion on wind and solar so far. So we've spent already since then as much money on the wind and solar that we have that we would have spent on an entire nuclear power plant had we built the power plant near Port Elizabeth.
All right.
And what
Dr.
we have
Kemm,
is intermittent power.
let me ask you to pause there for a moment. Let me ask you to pause there for a moment, and I apologize for that because I think that you've got lots more to add, and I wonder whether Liz is going to have a thing or two to say to respond to you. We'll continue the conversation in just a moment. Very good afternoon to you. This is Politics Unscripted, and you're watching the Uncensored Debate. We're discussing the issue of electricity shortage in the country. Just before we went on a break, Dr. Kemm explaining that 650 billion rand, this was the proposal to build at least 3 nuclear power stations sequentially. And it was not 1 trillion that was going to be thrown in at once. Liz, it makes me wonder whether you and the activists against nuclear power stations were wrong.
I don't think we were wrong at all. Since the Zondo Commission has been running, and I'm sure that you and your viewers have been keeping a note on that, the former finance minister, Nene, has shown, and there were cabinet minutes which were released, which we hadn't seen, which were available at that time, which show that the presentation that was made to cabinet underestimated the costs by about a third by using incorrect exchange rates and leaving out key costs that you need for projects like finance and development costs. And so in our submission to the proposed new bill that's on the table with NERS at the moment, we took those minutes and recalculated the costs. And I don't have it in front of me, but it was close to $1 trillion. So I think the other issue I'd like to disagree with is the Koeberg issue. This is something that nuclear promoters constantly put forward, is that Koeberg is the cheapest electricity. Well, of course it is, because all the capital costs have been paid off. Also, where there is nothing in the kitty for the decommissioning and the waste disposal, because it turned out, as was revealed earlier this year, that that's just a book value. So basically, written on a piece of paper, it says that, yes, we've got so many billions for decommissioning, but in fact, we don't have them because Eskom's bankrupt. So, sure. So if something was to go wrong, we would need to decommission, we wouldn't have it. But obviously, the other issue is that it's not state funding that is going into these renewables and these new plants. It's private industry. So the government is not having to cough up for plants. And when you look at Medupi and Kusile and look at the cost overruns, and somebody sent me something recently which I thought was quite interesting. So one of the new companies, as a Sibanya Stillwater mine company, reckons that it's going to cost 5 billion rand to put 400 megawatts of renewable power up for their use. And if you remember, before we even had the 1 trillion nuclear deal, or many, many years ago, we had the Pebble Bed, which was a small nuclear reactor, which was going to be the solution to all our woes. And this was like the late 90s and early 2000s. This was eventually scrapped in 2010, having used up 10 billion rand, and there's nothing to show for it. So I think, for me, when we are looking to the future for the electricity, we need to look at what have we got on the ground right now and how do we expand that. We need to look at small projects, small energy producers, so that we can build exponentially. You know, this is a very changeable world. Look at what COVID did to us. Anybody who was in the airplane business would be out by now. So those, being able to adapt quite fast, I think, is what we need to look at in the power sector now.
All right, and those are very interesting words from you, Liz. Emmanuel, adapting fast, you are a potential mining player. What's the plan from your end? I see lots of mining companies jumping up for joy, putting proposals in order to build their own power supply.
I remember a few years back, I spoke at the Mining and Renewables Conference, and I posed the idea of, the coming together of the renewable sector and the mining sector. We find ourselves, where the mining sector places such a heavy load on our peak electricity and everything else, that it would be pertinent that these large-scale power producers, power users, should I say, go renewable and take that load off, the base load off the grid, in order to free up electricity and power for the general public. Over and above that, I think, right now where we sit is that the quickest way and the more efficient way, well, this is my belief, Liz may disagree with me completely, but I believe that we need to get our coal-fired power stations running more efficiently. We need to get, getting cleaner energy out of our coal-fired power stations. I think the idea that, to just mothball all the coal-fired power stations that are out there at the moment is an error. We need to take over those things, add in new technologies in order to take, the industry forward, and in order to create better supply of electricity in South Africa.
All right. Chanda, you get to have the last word. Will we ever see the end of coal-fired power stations? And I say that with Ngulube and Kusile, which are fairly new, and they are still operated using coal.
They are still operated using coal. Look, I think what we have to look at is there's increasing pressure globally. I think in your previous segment you were looking at what's happening at the G7, all of the discussions around climate change and the pressure for us to clean up and reduce emissions. That falls on coal mines as well as coal-fired power stations equally. What we need to have in place really is a plan to facilitate a just transition from the coal-fired power plants to a cleaner economy. And that needs to bring along all of the communities that are in these mining areas, produce jobs, train people up, allow them to access that power as well as the people in the cities. So coal is not with us forever. Really, I think there's too much pressure from banks, from finance, from insurance, from politics for it to be along with us forever. But what we need to recognize is that South Africa is an economy that's really dependent on it currently, particularly in terms of it providing jobs to people across the country. And so we need to ensure that we work together, as Emmanuel said, as the renewables industry and as the dirtier side of energy to enable that transition.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chanda, for that. Dr. Kemm, I'm told that I do have a small window, so you could add a little bit here. Chanda speaks about the just transition. By the way, it is touted as perhaps one of the many topics that the President is going to be talking about at the G7. In fact, he may have spoken about already. Your view around nuclear, do you think there's enough appetite in the country, particularly if we're looking at the integrated resource plan?
Absolutely. As far as nuclear goes, we need the big nuclear power stations and we need the small ones, the pebble bed modular reactor type, which South Africa continued developing in Pretoria and privately on a reactor called the HTMR 100. We spent that money very, very wisely, the 10 billion that was mentioned earlier. And now what's happened is many other countries around the world have copied us and are following in our footsteps. And we, unfortunately, were about 10 to 15 years ahead back then. Now we've slid back to about equal to the leaders, but we're still in the leading field. But undoubtedly, we've got to be realistic. We've got to look at what is good for our people. We need our people to progress so that we have an advancing lifestyle. For that, we need coal from the north, high technology coal from the north, where the coal is. We need nuclear from the south, where the water is for the big nuclear, and then we need the small modular reactors to be around inside the country at mining installations and places like that. Currently, there's about 10 African countries that have indicated to the International Atomic Energy Agency that they want to go nuclear. They're all pursuing the South African type small modular reactors that we were world leaders in developing and still are. But we've got to be realistic. We need to run the country. We need to get the machinery going. This just transition, incidentally, is something we can throw out. It's not needed at all. As far as I'm concerned, it's a complete fallacy. What we have to do is put inexpensive power into the system so that our people get better jobs, better prospects for the future, more money in your pocket, and we advance our economy. And that's done by being realistic and being sensible and using the right power in the right place at the right time.
All right. Well, with those words, we've got to be realistic. That's where we end this conversation about where to when we look at the energy crisis that our country faces. That's where we end the uncensored debate.